there's just 20 feet of water between us, so it's not that scary, right?
Welcome back to Decouple Studios. I'm Jesse Freeston, and I'm fresh back in Montreal off of my tour of Bruce Power, the world's largest active nuclear plant. Nestled on Ontario's gorgeous Bruce Peninsula on the shores of Lake Huron, always been one of my top 5 greatest lakes in the Great Lakes. I got a tour from the man with his fingers on the buttons, authorized nuclear operator Dan Campbell.
We control the governor right here, so that speeds up and slows down the turbine.
2, 1, clean. Don't forget your bag.
Also along for the tour was Maddie Hilly, founder of the Campaign for a Green Nuclear Deal across the lake in the United States.
It was so cool getting to actually see the fuel bay.
Pete's group, they handle all the fuel after it comes out of the reactor.
I can probably take you for a little ride.
How much fuel am I looking at?
There's 24 bundles on each one of these trays, and they're 15 trays high.
When you see, a number of trays, that reflects millions of homes. And a segment this big can power one of our lives for a year. That's insane. It's an environmentalist dream, really.
We're gonna get back to the tour, but I wanna stay on this point of energy density here for a second, because this is really at the core of what makes nuclear such an intriguing energy source. And the spent fuel bay is probably the best place on Earth to visualize energy density. In total, Bruce's 8 reactors go through about 2 tons of uranium a day. But because uranium is so dense and heavy, 2 tons of uranium fits into roughly the size of an oil barrel, with the key difference that a barrel of uranium has the energy equivalent of 1 million barrels of oil. That's 1 million to 1. This one pool holds all the spent fuel that provided electricity to 3 million people over 5 years. You'll notice that none of it is in the air warming the planet. And future reactors will be able to reuse this fuel and get even more energy out of it. Put another way, if the average North American were to get all their energy needs from nuclear fission, the entire waste for their lifetime would fit inside a pop can. Soda can. We Canadians call soda pop. A little weird, I know, but in our defense, South Africans call it cool drink, which means that in a power outage, South Africans would end up with a lot of warm, cool drinks. Anyways, a lot of friends that I talked to about this moment at the fuel bay were concerned that I wasn't scared about standing over top of these glowing fuel pellets, especially since I and none of us were wearing any kind of radiation protection suit. In all fairness, I was wearing my Decouple t-shirt, but it's one of those situations where a little bit of knowledge can relieve a lot of anxiety.
Right now where we're standing, there's not much for radiation at all. Like it's less than 2.5, right? Yeah. Exactly.
Less than 2.5 here.
Yeah.
So when Dan says 2.5, he's talking about 2.5 millirem of radiation per hour. To put that into perspective, at 2.5 millirem per hour, if I wanted to get the dose I would get from one CT scan at a hospital, I would have had to stand over top of that fuel bay for 16 straight days, 24 hours a day.
I can't understand a man standing up there that long.
It turns out water is incredibly effective at absorbing nuclear radiation. Basically, as long as I didn't freak out and jump in the pool, everything was going to be fine. But that's when... No, I'm just kidding. Nothing happened. But I did ask.
The rumor that if you swim in the top of the pool, you're actually getting less than background. Could be.
I don't know for sure. It's very, very well shielded. I wouldn't dive too deep. Make it a very shallow.
As for why the spent fuel glows blue, well, that's because of something called the Cherenkov effect, which is what happens when an electron moves faster than the light that it is emitting.
What? Nothing moves faster than the speed of light. It's like Einstein 101. Fucking read it.
It turns out that Einstein's universal speed limit is specifically for the speed of light in a vacuum. Light in water, though, moves significantly slower, about 75% of its speed in a vacuum. Slow enough for the electrons to eclipse it and produce a blue burst of light in the process. As for how exactly that happens or why the light is blue, For that, you got to get into some funky physics with equations and stuff like that. It would be a whole other video, but I will put a link in the description for those who are interested. For now though, let's get back to the nuclear plant.
Having a 4-unit station, it's like 1 kilometer long. Going back and forth all day long, it's a lot of steps. So this is the turbine hall. This is the coolest view in the station. As you can see all 4 generating units all the way down.
To the untrained eye, like this one, a tour of a nuclear plant can be a bit overwhelming. Everything kind of looks the same. Giant pipe here, giant container there, valves and gauges galore. Dan tried his best to walk us through it, but it was pretty loud in there.
Right, that's where the lake water goes back down and then out to the lake again through that pipe.
And of course, we couldn't go inside the reactor containment. That's where these guys were headed. So I'm going to quickly explain the basics of the plant with the help of the 1971 Canadian National Film Board film with the whimsical title of On Power Refueling. So the little uranium pellets, the fuel, goes inside a sheath. The sheaths are then arranged in bundles. These bundles, by the way, are basically the mascots of the Candu reactor. There's one that greets you as you enter the control room, for example. Anyways, the bundles are then loaded into this death ray looking machine, the fuel loader, which then slides the bundles into one of the reactor's 480 fuel channels. Then it's fission time. The bundles are bombarded by a silent and invisible barrage of billions of neutrons. The collisions unleash even more neutrons and, very importantly, a ton of heat as the uranium atoms fission into smaller elements. That heat is then absorbed by the pressurized heavy water being pumped through the reactor. The pressurized water has a much higher boiling point than regular water, which is key here because it allows it to transfer the heat to the regular water that is flowing through a separate channel, all without any direct contact. This contactless transfer of heat is important because it means that the steam that is created by boiling that water is not radioactive. Everything from the steam forward works exactly the same as a coal or gas-fired power plant. The pressure from the steam spins a massive turbine, which then in turn spins a generator. And a generator is just a giant magnet spinning inside a circle of a bunch of other magnets. This is how almost all electricity is generated, with some notable exceptions like solar panels and lightning.
This part of the tour demystifies a lot of the fears around reactivity in nuclear power plants. Right on the other side of that brick wall is the reactor vault, and these pumps are circulating water through the reactor core. So that water itself in those pipes is radioactive, but we can stand here and there's no appreciable amount of radiation to speak of.
Thank you very much. No contamination.
We just walked through every single part of this nuclear power plant. None of us got any radiation dose whatsoever.
Well, apparently I didn't get superpowers. Control room.
I know.
This is the control room at Bruce A.
So one of the first reactions you get looking at this is just, this looks old.
Yeah, so like the technology is old, right?
Yeah.
Like it was designed in like the 50s and then it was modified in the 60s and then in the 70s. And now we introduce different things into it to make it better. If you look at those gray controls over there, those have been rebuilt and remodeled with like 3D printers, and those are brand new, but they've been made to replicate what was originally there, because that's what we're all used to seeing. Like once you spend enough time sitting here and practicing and learning, like you don't want things to change anymore. Right now it's putting out 851 megawatts.
This is just one of the 8 reactors at Bruce. So about how much power is that?
851 megawatts?
Yeah.
That would probably power like a city the size of Kitchener or something like that.
It's like a few 100,000 people.
Yeah.
Many are surprised to discover that some of the world's most massive power plants are in Canada, but Southern Ontario is one of North America's most densely populated regions, home to the world's busiest highway, the 401. In total, about a third of all Canadians live on this little sliver of the map, and in the early 2000s, they lived mostly unknowingly through the greatest greenhouse gas emission reduction in the history of North America, when Ontario stopped burning coal to make electricity. And they got it done without any blackouts. Well, except for that one, but that wasn't their fault. Dan himself was a major protagonist in the coal phase-out. He went from being an operator at North America's largest coal plant, Nanticoke, to being an operator at North America's largest nuclear plant, Bruce. He is a walking example of the elusive political goal called the just transition, which is when workers who make their living in the fossil fuel industry transition to a dignified job in a low to no emission environment, like a nuclear plant.
Smooth operator.
But don't let Dan's easygoing nature fool you. The coal phase-out wasn't easy. The Ontario government originally promised to phase out coal by 2009, but even with the unexpected energy savings brought about by the introduction of LED light bulbs en masse, as well as all the factory closures that came about after the 2008 financial crisis, Ontario fell short. The government was forced to leave North America's largest coal plant, Nanticoke, powering much of southern Ontario for years after the deadline. Those concerned with global warming were pretty upset, but not Dan and the other workers down at Nanticoke.
People knew about climate change, but in that community that I worked in, that was kind of like an attack on our livelihood. Same with the smog days in Toronto. To say that this thing that I trained myself to do for years, to get this intimate knowledge of all this equipment around me, I'm actually hurting people with it. You know, I'm giving people asthma. I'm making it so you can't see the top of the CN Tower in Toronto on a hot summer's day.
Smog, for those lucky enough to have made it this far without living it, is a mashup of the terms smoke and fog.
It's another smoggy day. The air is thick and heavy with tons and tons of toxic chemicals.
A smog day is one where there's so much smoky fog in the air that breathing outdoors is considered bad for you, and people are encouraged to avoid leaving the house. In 2005, for example, Toronto's already short summer had a biblically inspired 40 smog days. Basically what would happen is the rain would wash away the smog, and then you'd get like one good day to play outside before the smog would reorganize itself. It was a shitty summer.
I'd look at that big stack, you know, and it would just pour out of there night and day. And we used to tell ourselves, oh, you know what, those smog days in Toronto, that's not this coal plant. And keep in mind, we're talking about the biggest coal plant in North America. That's not this coal plant. That's all the coal plants in Ohio doing that.
This idea that the Americans were to blame for the smog in southern Ontario was not just coal worker speak. It was repeated regularly by the Canadian media and political officials.
The big smog blew in with a heat wave from the Ohio River Valley in the southeastern United States. It's the kind of pollution Canada has begged the United States to control.
We press the state of Ohio and other states to cut back on their emissions.
We were just so eager to pass the buck. And like, I believed that. You know, people that I knew and cared about and my friends and respected, they told me that, and I took that at face value.
Ontario eventually did grow up and accept responsibility for its own air quality, but they still had a lot of trouble getting Nanticoke off the grid. That is until two young and ambitious Ontarians, Aubrey Drake Graham and Justin Drew Bieber, launched their music careers. They gave the impression at the time that they were motivated by a search for fame and wealth, but secretly the plan was to inspire Ontarians to close Nanticoke's 8 coal units, a mission they revealed to no one. Even Canada's flagship investigative journalism program, W5, couldn't crack them.
Justin, when you set out to do this, did you have a goal in mind?
No, I was basically just doing it for fun.
And so it was on. Both Drake and Biebs released their debut albums in 2010, both largely recorded with coal energy. For his first music video, Drake used as little dirty electricity as possible, insisting on lighting the whole thing with one cheap projector. He named his first album Thank Me Later, a tip of the hat to the power workers that were going to ensure that his future videos be properly lit with carbon-free electricity. He also offered to help nuclear power with its public image problem. This emotionally raw support for power workers pushed both record sales and nuclear productivity through the roof. So much so that by the end of 2010, Ontario was able to shut down 2 of Nanticoke's 8 units. We're a quarter of the way to our goal. Then it was Justin's turn. In 2011, while filming the video for Under the Mistletoe, Bieber stormed off set upon discovering that the snow wasn't real and that the machine making it was powered by coal electricity. That night, he asked Santa for a clean electricity grid to record his future albums on. Well, Santa doesn't exist, but power workers do, and that year, 2011, Darlington, Canada's second largest nuclear plant, posted its most productive year ever. The extra electricity allowed Ontario to shut down 2 more coal-fired units at Nanticoke. We're halfway there. Bieber returned the following June with Believe, demonstrating growth in his dancing, his acting, and his understanding of the wicked challenge of fighting poverty and carbon emissions at the same time.
We're under pressure. 7 billion people in the world trying to fit in.
But far from a pop version of a depressing climate change report, Believe, as its name suggests, is an inspiring call to faith in the process, including faith in the magic rocks themselves. Number 92 on your periodic table, and number 1 in Justin's heart, uranium.
Us, trust, couple things I can't spell without you, 'cause we on time.
This line alone inspired Ontario's power workers to a record summer in reactor refurbishment. Culminating in the restarting of 2 reactors at Bruce that had been inactive since the 1990s.
Double reactor resurrection!
That was it. At 11:32 p.m., Unit 1 is back online. No cheering, applause, or handshakes. The only sign of emotion is a thumbs up and a smile from Station Vice President Mike Burke.
For comparison, here's Drake and Bieber when they got the news that Units 1 and 2 were back online at Bruce.
Talk to him, boy! Yeah.
The progress at Bruce allowed Nanticoke to shut down its final 4 units, fully removing coal from Ontario's electrical grid.
Coal removed!
Seeing the towers fall to the earth inspired Drake to name his 2013 album Nothing Was the Same. The cover features him looking into the eyes of a young child, backgrounded by the clear blue Toronto sky he was helping deliver to future generations. The album is also noteworthy for its barely disguised digs at the anti-nuclear movement that tried to stop him from getting to his goal.
The part I love most is they need me more than they hate me, so they never take shots. I got everybody.
We shut it down and then we don't have smog days anymore. They haven't changed the coal output in Ohio. Like, that was not a fact, right?
Sure enough, Toronto had its last smog day ever in the summer of 2014, in part because of the closing of Nanticoke. Drake then leaned into the positive vibes, releasing his celebratory album Views, his first ever recorded without coal power electricity. For the cover, he chose a photo of the top of the CN Tower to honor the first year in his life where he had an unobstructed view of the monument for all 365 days.
And I say, hell yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah.
As for Bieber, he titled his first coal-free album Purpose, a reference to his continued commitment to decoupling human well-being from its ecological impacts, a purpose he credits with giving meaning to his otherwise senseless and absurd rise to global fame. By the time all the coal dust had settled, nuclear power had provided 87% of the juice that allowed Ontario to get coal off its electricity grid and make it one of the cleanest in all of North America. Only surpassed in terms of emissions by places like Quebec and Manitoba, which have abundant hydropower. But Ontario is way ahead of everywhere on Earth that's betting on solar and wind to decarbonize.
'Cause I'm a smooth operator.
It was so cool meeting Dan because I'm constantly talking to legislators and coal communities about transitioning fossil fuel workers to nuclear jobs in clean energy that are high paying, that are generational, that are union backed. And that's Dan. That's his story.
You went from being the problem to being the solution, but doing very similar work.
Yeah, and unknowingly to me at the time, I was concerned about how I was going to provide for my family. I was just appreciative to have the opportunity to make more money, become better trained, get a better job, and have that financial security that I wanted from not having it as a child and told myself that I would get.
You're a smooth operator.
It is sort of funny, you're in this huge industrial facility and there are like pipes and valves and heavy machinery. You can understand why pro-nuclear environmentalism is so revolutionary, because our traditional view of being good to the environment is harmonizing with nature, and this sort of facility would be viewed as unnatural or not positive for the environment. But this new way of looking at being good stewards of our planet says, no, we can reduce our impacts and leave more nature to be nature. It's counterintuitive, but once it clicks, it's a really cool vision for what building the future looks like.
That does it for this episode of Decouple Studios. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Why not? I mean, you might as well just go ahead and do it. So I just want to thank Dan for bringing us into his world. He's also a musician, by the way, and his latest track is what you're hearing right now. I want to thank Howard Forson. He was the one that introduced us to Dan and answered a whole lot of my silly questions about life in a nuclear plant. I want to thank AJ Korkidakis for the video gamey animations on my Drake and Biebs versus Cole segment, and Ariadna Toledo for the sound effects. Thanks also to Ruth Brown, Sarah Vaughan, Big Daddy Kane, Sade, Senor Coconut, and all those who recorded covers of Smooth Operator over the years. It fits Dan perfectly. And I want to thank Peter for the sweet ride over the fuel bay, Lindsay Davidson at the Ontario Ministry of the Environment for getting me the smog day data. Thanks to Lee and Josh from Big Red Oak for the drone shots of the plant. Oh, and I can't forget Dave Clark for hooking me up with those NFB archives. Other than that, I will catch you guys next time on Decouple Studios.